This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Stevenson with his own moves. Carrington. North are in front.
Okay, well, that was better than I thought it was going to be honest. Welcome back to North Pod. And I don't know, I guess 2 weeks in a row we've played pretty well. And also 2 weeks in a row we haven't got the job done, but a pretty honourable loss. I think honourable losses aren't necessarily what the end goal is for us, but I think coming up against the top side, losing by 35 points, we'll take that. So, yeah, I thought on balance we played a pretty good game and just, got outclassed, I guess. So, yeah, in case you didn't catch it, it was a 35-point loss to the Pies at Marvel, 105-70. Yeah, it was a solid game. I thought probably at times we looked as good as we've looked all year, and then at other times we've looked as bad as we have at times this year. In terms of the story of the game, I thought quarters 1, 2, and 3 was just, the ball spent so much time in the Pies' forward half of the ground. It just generally didn't come out of there until they scored a goal. We weren't able to penetrate and hit targets to move the ball to our inside forward 50. Their defensive setup and tackling pressure was just really strong, made it hard for us to move the ball the way that we were trying to. And I mean, I don't think we were humiliated by any stretch. We were just outclassed by a better side, really. I think we all are pretty comfortable with the fact that Collingwood looks to be the best side this year, so at least at this point. And they were well on their way last year to being this side, I guess. So, yeah, just we weren't able to beat their zone defence. And Darcy Moore, obviously, I don't think he had a massive game, but the way that the North players had to avoid him, I guess, when we're coming out of defence, that impacted the way that we were able to move the ball. And, from time to time we'd go long down the line and generally we wouldn't move it past that point. So it was just, as soon as Collingwood got it inside 50 or even just sort of into their half of the ground, it really stayed there, as I said, until they scored a goal. And there was periods of the game where it sort of spent sort of 8 or 9 minutes in a row there and Collingwood got a point or, repeat stoppages inside 50. And then eventually go back to the middle and, sometimes we were a pretty decent clearance side again today. So that was where we got our best opportunities from a centre clearance. But yeah, it was just certainly quarters 1 through 3, they were just a better side at holding onto the ball and disposing of the ball in general, and just, I guess, efficiency in terms of going forward and taking advantage of the opportunities that they had. Yeah, I think like that's a fairly decent summary of the match. As I said, 35-point loss, we'll take it at this point. We don't want to be taking those for the rest of our life, but I thought, all in all, I fully expected it to be a 10-goal plus loss. So I'll take 35. And there was a time in the game where I thought it was headed that direction, but fortunately, late we were able to get back into the game. Not in terms of winning it, but put some pressure on the scoreboard, I guess. So that was pleasing. Before I jump into the positives and negatives, I just want to encourage everyone to share me with any North Melbourne fans that you know and help me get the word out there. I've really appreciated the support of everyone that's got on board so far, and thanks for sticking around and having another listen. Please subscribe on your chosen podcast service. Leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And then, get involved on my social accounts, primarily Twitter, Instagram, at NorthPod Show. Got a Facebook, got a YouTube, post the podcast there too. Get involved. Let's jump in. I always start with the negatives. It's just easier to, I guess, dissect some of the things that went wrong, I think. So I think I'm going to make some comments that are mostly about the first quarter, and then there's a couple that kind of extend to other areas of the game. But I mean, we've heard it before. It's sort of a broken record on this one. It's not an easy fix because it takes time, but just simple skill areas kept costing us goals. I think Collingwood kicked 4 in the first quarter, and 3 of them were directly from sort of soft turnovers. There was just, it's just those mistakes that good sides make, maybe 1 a game, and we make 3 or 4 a quarter at this point, although it wasn't. I think it got mostly tidied up after the first quarter. There was an example where Powell didn't hold a mark on the wing that he should have taken it. He had a little bit of body pressure on it, dropped it. That resulted in a score. Logue had a kick smothered on the wing. We were sort of, about to launch it inside 50. He got smothered. It went up the other end, I'm fairly sure, for a goal or at least a score. They were both in the first quarter. Daniel Howe, whilst he did kick our first goal in that second quarter, had a couple of absolute howlers. He had a handball. We sort of won the clearance, and he handballed back to Sheasel, who was under pressure, missed Sheasel, and a goal went to the Collingwood as a result of that. Like, that was a horrific turnover. There was a time, I think maybe in the third quarter, where he got ran down from behind, just didn't have that awareness of what was around him. So it's just always those preventable errors and skill errors, a lot of those, where we've just got to keep getting better as a group and keep selecting those players that make less of those mistakes, I guess. Because ideally we want to sort of 2 things. We want to be working on reducing how often they're happening, and also being able to stop or limit the damage when they do happen. Because I think that's the other thing about great sides is, when they do make a mistake, they'll still make it really hard for you to capitalise on it. Whereas at the moment, I feel like if we make one of those mistakes, it's pretty much an automatic score, and oftentimes a goal. So that was, just more of the same. We've seen that for the past couple of years where we just give up the ball more easily than we should. The next thing is Ben McKay, and I know there were a lot of comments about Ben McKay. I'm going to get to some of them in a minute, but he just has to be better. I think I've been a bit of a Ben McKay apologist this year. I thought, he got injured in the preseason, missed the first month and a bit, came back and looked rusty, has taken time to learn the game plan, and has had a couple of decent games sort of here and there. But today, he just didn't impact contests. So if he was in a one-on-one contest, I thought that he was outmarked way too often. Like, it wasn't even a case of, him intercept marking. He wasn't splitting them and making a 50-50 ball. There was a couple of times where he just didn't assert his sort of physical presence on a contest. He wasn't able to spoil where I thought he was in prime position to do so. And I don't want to say he looked disinterested, but he certainly, I don't know, he looked a bit emotionless, I guess, and didn't look aggressive in the way that he was attacking the footy. I just don't know which McKay we're going to get each week at the moment, because we've had a couple of sort of decent outings and a couple of shockers like we did today. We just need more from him. He's supposed to be our number one defender and sort of defender of the long term, and McKay was definitely beaten today, so that is a concern. I think we'll talk about him a little bit later as well. The next thing is it's a bit of a positive and a negative together. We mostly handled the Collingwood pressure after quarter 1, but we just weren't able to break through it. So quarter 1, I thought we were overwhelmed by the pressure and turned it over, as I mentioned a couple of times. I don't think we handled it very well in quarter 1, but after that, I thought for the most part we were able to kind of weather it, but we were often hand passing sideways, backwards to kind of get out of that pressure, and often just handballing into someone else who's sort of under a similar level of pressure. And that's what they're trying to create those situations. So it's not like North Melbourne where sort of, I don't think it was in a design choice by us to be kind of over handballing it a lot. But I guess what pleased me was we resisted that urge to just bomb it long without looking. I thought we didn't do much of that during this game. I thought we probably at times could have afforded to do that a bit more because we just spent so much time handballing it and trying to pass on the pressure to the next player. And there's a time and place for those forward handballs or those backward handballs. And some of them were really good. I thought, like Will Phillips did some good work in there, and Wardlaw at times looked like he was doing the right things, but Greenwood, who I'll talk about in a minute, he was also at times great with his hands. But yeah, it was just that we weren't able to, I guess, overpower that pressure. But at the same time, I don't think that we succumbed to it as much as I would normally expect us to. So, as I said, it was more it's kind of a neutral observation, I guess. I thought it was a bit more mature in terms of our performance, in that we weren't bombing it long, and we kind of got to look at what the best side in the competition can do in terms of that pressure. So, yeah, that was mostly positive. As I said, I thought, it's something for us to work on and improve on in the future. The next thing is we're just still in search of that pressure forward who can tackle and be clean in possession, and just stay in the game. So Spicer had a good moment, had a really sort of clever little kick that resulted in a score. But aside from that, that was one of his 2 possessions for the game. He didn't actually lay a tackle and was subbed out during the third quarter. Curtis had a similar problem last year. Curtis was actually subbed on for Spicer, and similarly, I think had one really good possession, and that was about it. We just haven't been able to find that small forward that can put pressure on and get involved offensively. We obviously got rid of Kane Turner, I don't know when that was, maybe a month or a month and a half ago, because the knock on him was that he just wasn't getting involved offensively. And I think we're sort of seeing the reason for why Turner had kept his spot for so long, because the alternatives are kind of giving us the same. Like, it's pressure, but it's not enough pressure, and they're not getting involved offensively enough. I mean, he kicked 4 in the VFL today. I'm certainly not advocating for him to come back in, but yeah, that's a big area of need for us, is that small pressure forward. As I said, Curtis isn't there at the moment in terms of his pressure, but gets involved on the scoreboard from time to time. Spicer is a nearly player. I mentioned he had 0 tackles, but he certainly had pressure acts, and he was running around causing the Collingwood players to, he was changing their disposal, but not enough such that we were getting a turnover from it, I guess. So I think it's probably worth sticking with Drury or Spicer for a bit longer, because obviously Drury didn't play today. He was the non-playing emergency. But yeah, it's just such an area of need that we don't have at the moment, is that forward half player that can put elite pressure on the opposition's defenders. And then the last negative, it was just late in that third quarter. We let a couple of goals through, and they sort of broke our backs, really. Pushed it out towards 50-point margin. There was 2 goals. One, a Josh Dacos kick from about 50 that ended up bouncing in the square that we weren't able to get a touch on. I thought that was pretty poor. We had some players around the square that could have got a touch on it. And it's just that you've got to be relentless in your attack on the footy. I thought that was poor. Similarly, a couple of minutes later, Ginnivan took a mark on the goal line that he shouldn't have been allowed to take. That should have been spoiled through for a point. And it's just those small things that end up, they're the things that if we can improve them, get us closer to, being an elite side, because that resulted in 2 goals. So if you take those 2 off them, we're back to a 25-point margin, and then, it's what other incremental things can you find along the way. So yeah, I just think I wouldn't call it braid fades. It was probably some fatigue in there. But yeah, it's just they're the sort of things that we've got to get out of our game, I guess. And I think they stand out less than, a kick that's come off someone's shin, but they have the same impact. I mean, both of them resulted in goals. So they're the sort of things that I'm looking for us to improve. But plenty of good. As I said before, we got within 35 points of the top side. We didn't fall away late. The commentators at 3/4 time were talking about how it's likely that North Melbourne's going to fall away, the younger bodies and less mature. You can sort of see Collingwood running away with it. and I was with them. I was kind of expecting that to happen, but we won the last quarter. I think we kicked 6 goals in the last quarter. Yeah, I thought it was just a really good performance based on expectations. We didn't really ever challenge them for the win, particularly after not kicking a goal in the first quarter. But we were competitive, and if we'd been a little bit more accurate early on, we could have put a bit of that pressure on in terms of getting within a couple of goals late. That being said, it's swings and roundabouts. We kicked pretty accurately in the last quarter, so we ended up with 10-10. So it's probably only generally I think you want to be kicking sort of, if you're kicking 10 goals, hopefully you got 7 or 8 points. I feel like that's pretty average accuracy, and we were only a touch below it. So yeah, I just thought, generally speaking, the fact that we were in the game and not blown away was a success for us. Yeah, it's a simplistic positive, but that's where I've got with that one. My second good just says, thank God for Greenwood. I know because he's a bigger body and he's in the contested ball, he stands out, but 25 touches, 10 tackles, 16 contested possessions, 10 clearances. He was never rushed. He was always getting his arms free and getting a handball away. Some of his possessions weren't super effective, but he just didn't allow us to be out-muscled around the stoppages. Yeah, without him in that second and third quarter, I honestly think we would have been blown away. It's just every time there was a stoppage, he was, getting his hands on it, or at least stopping the Pies from breaking out of a clearance. He was often the one that was getting tackled for a secondary ball up, but that was because he sort of got into a position to stop Collingwood from getting away. He was absolutely fantastic and really showed why he's playing ahead of Cunnington at the moment, which, I don't know, I think all North Melbourne supporters have got a bit of a soft spot for Cunners, but Cunnington wasn't giving us what Greenwood gave us today, unfortunately, for a variety of reasons. So, yeah, I thought he was possibly our best player on the day, or certainly, if not, close to. He just was really immense in the contest. Then I've got some other young players who I thought backed up performances from last week really well. I thought Phillips probably had his best game for the club. He certainly smashed his possessions record. He had 29 touches, 5 tackles, 5 clearances. And like I mentioned earlier, he just didn't bomb it. He generally found someone, but we could just work on. I think probably the thing for him is to not always give that first option, because his hands are so quick, and sometimes he probably needs to, balk or look around, just because he was often handballing it to someone who was under the same amount of pressure as him or more sometimes. And he did have 23 handballs. He wasn't using it by foot too much. He's usually a pretty good inside 50 kick, although he did miss one during today's game that he would normally hit, I would have thought. But he had a great game. When I'm nitpicking, I thought, he really showed that inside class that we know that he had, and he showed it more consistently over the course of the game. Bailey Scott backed up his big performance last week. He had 30 touches and a kick to goal and had eight inside 50s. Had that same drive and distance as last week. He had 625 metres gain. So again, a lot of those kicks sort of getting from the half-back flank to the half-forward flank, and he was really positive. And similarly, Ford, a little bit more quiet than last week, had 16 touches, 6 marks, but did a couple of really good things. Hit a contest really fast on the wing and ended up kicking it to Steve-O, who scored. He took a couple of strong marks, kind of, under pressure on the wing. So he's definitely, I guess, cemented his spot for a couple of weeks. He was really good. So it was just good to see those young, I don't want to call them fringe, but I mean, I don't think Scott's super fringe, but those younger players back it up and have another good week, I guess, after a great week last week. So I thought they were fantastic. Some other individuals, I thought by and large, I've talked about McKay. He was disappointing, but Logue and McDonald and Zeeble, I thought, were pretty good. There was no Pies forward that sort of looked unstoppable. They had them pop up. I thought, like Ginnivan popped up for a couple, and Cox kicked a couple. Johnson looked all right at times, but There was no Pies player that really got a hold of us. McDonald was intercepting really well, and Logue and Zeeble and McDonald were giving us that drive out of defence that was really impressive. So I don't think any of them had perfect games. I think Zeeble butchered it a couple of times. But in terms of comparing them to McKay, I guess they had great games. And Logue, I think, is getting more and more confident by the game that he plays with the group, that, you know, he's picking those opportunities to kind of run with it a bit, and picking those opportunities to just take a step and, you know, give the kick that he needs to. So, yeah, McDonald similarly backed up. I thought, you know, if last week was his best game for the year, I thought today was probably his second best. Again, he just attacked the contest and, you know, didn't make too many mistakes, I guess. And then the last positive was Larkey. I feel like earlier in the year, he was just getting into a lot of trouble where he was constantly playing behind. And as a result, those quick kicks would come in and he'd get caught out and, you know, not contest a mark. He played in front all day today, I thought, and regularly got rewards from it. He kicked 5 goals too and had 8 marks. He really, to be honest, dominated Murphy, who was on him for the most part. Moore spent most of his time on Coleman Jones, and I mean, Moore definitely had a better game, but I thought Coleman Jones took him out of areas where he was going to potentially damage, you know, what we were doing. But yeah, just kept playing in front, did Larkey, took some great marks, was mostly started a bit off with his goal kicking, but finished strongly. And he's kicked, you know, he just continues a great season. He's kicked 30 goals for the year now, which for the side that's sitting 17th is, you know, a pretty decent result. He's on track for about 60 goals, which would be a great return for a side that's finishing towards the bottom. Steve-O also, he kicked 2 in his 100th game, had 9 marks and looked pretty lively and impressive, had some really strong overhead marks, which was great to see, and again continued his great season. I would love to know how many and how well Steve-O and Larkey would be playing this year if they were in a better side, or a side that was, you know, hitting them on the lead more often. It's been, the last couple of weeks have been such an improvement on what we saw earlier in the year, and hopefully it's continual improvement. But yeah, I thought Larkey in particular was really good. I'd say it's between he and Greenwood for our best on, with probably Phillips not far behind. But yeah, he had a good game. All right, well, I said I'd talk about McKay earlier. I'm sure this is where it's going to come up. I put out a tweet just after the game asking for some thoughts, and so let's go to Twitter. So Mark BJ said, "We are getting better. Have Taron Thomas in for Hall. Not sure what we are trying to do with Lazaro. Gee, how good Greenwood and Phillips." Yeah, I think eventually it'd be good to have Taron Thomas in for Hall whenever the right time is. Lazaro, I'll talk about him a bit later. I think he deserves a bit more time, just in terms of adjusting himself. I don't know if he's going to make it, but I think he deserves a couple of decent runs at it, not just being the sub and that sort of thing. So it was his first full game, and Greenwood and Phillips were fantastic. Jane says get some continuity and they will click. Couldn't agree more. I thought it was a pretty decent game today. Billy Wardle, tidy up some skills and decision making, and we will see a 6-goal better team. Starting to see real improvement. Yeah, and I would agree with that. The last couple of weeks have been a real improvement based on what we saw earlier in the year. Despite the fact that we won those 2 early games, I think probably we've played better footy the last couple of weeks. So yeah, I would agree with that. 6 Keno, we need to appreciate Nick Larkey does one of the hardest jobs in football consistently every week in the worst team for the last 5 years. Man is a genius. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to fault most of that. I don't know if I'd call him a genius, but I do agree that it's been a really hard forward line to play in for the last while, since about 2019, and he just continually kicks goals, and, you know, at times I feel like the fans get on his back a bit, but I couldn't agree more. He's fantastic. Ryan Law, effort clear to see for most of the day, tidy our ball use up and we'll be competitive against most. Young midfield has gone well the last couple of weeks, but Greenwood needs credit. and love for his efforts in leading them. Good to see Griff starting to look good considering question marks over McKay's future. Greenwood's been fantastic. I agree. We've just got a bit of tidying up to do. McKay, I don't know, man. I actually don't know how I feel about McKay after today's game. I think I'm still living in that world where I want him to be better than he has been, I guess. Rousseauet can start to see the sustainable game plan and the benefit of playing youth, and don't play McKay, Logue, Core in the one team ever again. Yeah, interesting, because I think if those three are in form against particular sides, I think that makes sense. It didn't make sense to do that today with Collingwood's tools, or lack thereof. But yeah, I mean, with Core in the form that he's been in, and McKay in the form that he's been in, it's tough to know who I'd want more in the team at the moment. I'm only saying McKay because we want him to stick around through free agency, I guess. Michael, the effort was there, didn't get blown out of the water. Tidy up skills will be okay. I think we've covered that, and I couldn't agree more. This is King with a 1. Although we didn't win, today's efforts helped the belief in the process. Some areas to improve and tidy up, definitely, but some really good signs to be happy about. And yes, I could not agree more with that. JD, stuck with them for most of the second, third and fourth quarter. We are building, stick with the young blokes. Spicer, Ford, etc. should play most games this season. Both have shown they have talent and are willing to put in the effort. Yeah, I definitely agree with Ford. I think Spicer, he's going to need to show more than he did today long term to keep his spot, but I would expect to see more of him this year for sure. Chef of Salvation wasn't happy with the lack of pressure on the Pies midfielders. Too many stand and watch instead of gang tackling like the Pies were doing. Loved the last quarter. I would agree that, that's why the Pies are in the position that they're in as one of the best teams in the comp. Their pressure was really good, and at times they were gang tackling us, whereas we were generally having some of our tackles broken. But yeah, I think that's just a sign of the fact that we're not there yet, to be honest. I didn't look at that and go, we're not trying. I just went, we're not there yet, I guess. Adam XL, I can live with the honourable losses that lead us getting closer to Harley Reid, because let's face it, as much as some of the kids are showing signs, there will likely be a sizable list cut at the end of the season. We still need a lot more talent than we have going forward. I don't know how I feel about. I'm not in the business of playing for Harley Reid. I'm just a little bit on the fence about what. Yep, we are going to cull, and I'd say someone like Aaron Hall, someone like Charlie Lazaro, like those players that we're not sure about are going to be culled. But we don't have depth as it is. So if we're getting rid of those players that we're calling depth, like at the end of the day, let's just hope that we're replacing them with potential elite talent, I guess. And maybe that's Harley Reid if we happen to finish in the bottom or trade for that first pick. Or it's, someone else. I mean, I've talked about that elite small forward. We really need a player like that. And that type of player is generally not in the first sort of 10 or 15 selections of the draft. It's not always the case, but generally speaking, you find those players later in the draft because they're, it's a lot of midfielders and key forwards in that first batch of players, generally speaking. L. Tanner, Wardlaw has changed us. His attack and hunt really sets the tone. It's contagious. With better execution, we're a chance to beat Essendon next week. I agree. Wardlaw's attack on the footy has been great. He wasn't as good today as his first match, but he was still great. He really does hunt the footy really well. So I couldn't agree more with that. And I think, I'll talk about the Essendon game in a couple of minutes, but I think we are a sneaky chance. AFL for life. Disappointing, but a lot to look forward to. I think that's a great summary. Ash played one short with McKay. Ford plays every game now. Goldie gets another contract. Larkey needs more help, but look what he can do when the ball's actually kicked to him. And I think that is a great point around Larkey. If it's kicked well to him, that's what we can get out of him. I think it'd be fascinating to see what we do with Goldie at the end of the year. And I think it's probably going to be dictated by what we see from Cherry in the second half of the year when he gets back, because obviously he played round one and was ahead of Goldie. So I think if we do give Goldie a contract for next year, and I agree he's earning it, don't get me wrong, but I think both us and him kind of need to be comfortable with the fact that he's not going to be our first choice ruckman next year, hopefully. And yeah, played one shot with McKay. Felt you're not wrong today. Tubby Tanker, yep, great effort today. The turnovers killed us, so tidying up the skills and more effort from McKay and CCJ will take us up the ladder. I think, yeah, CCJ was quiet today, but he had such a great game last week. I can I can give him a quiet week. Bo Hawkins, not the worst game and not the best. Expected a 6-goal loss. Still plenty of room for improvement. And I think, yeah, I mean, if you're expecting, I was expecting a 10-goal loss. So I was probably slightly happier than you, but I agree with that sentiment. We can't be happy with honourable losses forever. Marty Blake played one quarter of footy and look what happens. Outscore the top team. Player-wise, Mackay, Spicer, Lazaro need to lift or lose their spot. Ford is going to be a gem. Can't be bringing Turner back after he kicks 4. Stick to the younger players and keep developing them. Yeah, I can't really refute anything in that. Got a couple left. Joe Dirt didn't get blown away by as much as I was expecting. We need a kicking coach badly. Yeah, that is... I mean, I'm sure we do lots of work on our kicking, and that's one of those things in today's AFL. If you can't kick it 30 metres accurately, you will struggle to get a game unless you play for North Melbourne, which I say only partly in jest. I do think our kicking is something that we need to improve, but I think kicking is something you can improve. You can't go from being a horrific kicker to an elite kicker, but I think that you can improve, from being a 5 out of 10 to an 8 out of 10, and that's kind of where a lot of our players need to get to. Piercy, young brigade starting to build some chemistry. Long way to go, but there are some positives emerging. McDonald was really good. Lowe got better as the game went on. Willfield looking like he's hitting some good form. I think, yeah, I've talked about that, and I agree. Has MMA... The improvement in Scott is so good to watch, and is it time to drop McKay? I don't think it's time to drop McKay, but I think we're getting closer. It would be a really tough call to drop him, given he's our number one key defender. But I'd say he's played maybe 2.5 good games, and that might be generous. I just think we'd want to pick the right match, I guess. Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a really tough one. Graham King, I don't think we're ever really in the game, but 35-point loss to the first place team is not too bad. Slow starts need to be fixed as it's put us on the back foot. I think CCJ has helped free up Larkey, who benefited with 5, which could have been 7. Bring on the Bombers. I think that's a good point, that having another tall forward in there next to Larkey, who's actually, somewhat a worthwhile target and can take a key defender of the Oppo out, has helped him. I think that's a great point, actually, Graham. Loyal Kanga, Spicer and Zaro not up to it, and I'd like to see Howe and Hall in the 2s. Harvey might get a call up for a debut. Umpires were no good. We need to take more contested marks. Yeah, I don't think our contested marking game was on today. We've had some good games with that recently, but today wasn't one of them. I agree. Look, Spicer and Lazaro probably aren't up to it, but I think we need this year to, I guess, be sure about that. And yeah, Howe and Hall in the 2s, I think, to be honest, they're in the 2s when Shields comes back and when either a Goda or a Taron Thomas comes in. So I don't think we're far away from that being a reality. All right, well, that's all the Twitter ones I've got time for. I'm sorry if I didn't read out your question. It might have come through after I've recorded, or trying to keep my podcast a listenable length. So I'm just going to whip through a couple of things. Jai Simkin re-signing until the end of 2029 during the week was fantastic. Great sign of commitment. You'd hope so from the captain. You'd hope our captain's committed long term, but it's great that we've got him locked up for another 5 or 6 years. And hopefully he's our captain for that time if everything's going well. I think, he and McDonald have been solid this year. I think there's been a bit of talk around, what's the value in having 2 captains. But I think, given where we're at as a club, I think spreading some of those responsibilities is a good thing. I think it's probably underrated by people outside of elite sport how much the captains are doing that we don't, as the general public, kind of see. So I think having the 2 to be able to share that responsibility, as long as they're actually, on the same page about things, has been really good. And yeah, I think it's great that Simpkins signed on. I mean, that was really the only piece of news, good piece of news. Obviously, the VFL side, if you didn't catch up on that, had a good win earlier in the day against the Collingwood VFL side, won by about 40 points. And Tucker was probably the best player, 25 touches, 5 marks, 5 tackles. He's one that maybe could come back in for someone like an Aaron Hall or a Daniel Howe. And yeah, I mean, Turner kicked 4 goals, but I don't know that anyone's going to be campaigning for him to come back into the side. So just a quick look ahead to next week. We've got Essendon at Marvel on Sunday for that twilight fixture, 4:40. That's an Essendon home game, so I'm sure it won't be a very friendly crowd there for us, unfortunately, but at least it's our home deck. I think we're a little sneaky chance. I'm certainly not expecting us to win, but Essendon's form's been a bit up and down, so I do think we're a chance to beat them. In terms of my early thoughts on the team, I think, Darcy Tucker in for Daniel Howe. Howe just made too many mistakes today to hold his spot for mine, and I know he's that depth player that we need when we've got injuries, because at least he's got a sort of mature body, but yeah, let's bring Tucker in. He's had a game. He's had some time off the injury. He's had a game back in the VFL. Let's get him in. I talked about it earlier. I think McKay, he's required at the moment, but he does need to lift. And if things don't improve, I guess we'll have no choice but to change things there. I think Lazaro deserves another match. He was very quiet today. Only had 5 or 6 touches, but it was his first, full game. So I think it would be unfair to cull him after that, but I think you get 2 matches would be my philosophy. If you're showing really nothing in your 2, then let's try something else. And similarly, I could see dropping Spicer for Jury again, just because Jury, he had his 3 matches. He's a bit quiet. He missed today. Spice was pretty quiet today. He got subbed out. I think it would be good to mix up those opportunities, I guess, because we want to try and spread out those opportunities and see who takes them on. Like, Sheasel obviously took his opportunities at the start of the year, and there's just no way that we'd be dropping him at this point. But there are still 6 or 7 that I think every week it's a bit of a, all right, what are we doing with them? But yeah, I think that's all for the podcast. I don't, it's such a long time away, that next week's match, so I don't want to talk too much about what could happen, but I think we've got 2 matches left before the bye. So yeah, thanks for listening to the podcast. Just want to I thank everyone for their comments and feedback and support. It's been an amazing start to this podcasting business, and I can't thank everyone enough for giving it a listen. Remember to subscribe, rate, review, and follow me on the socials at NorthPod Show. I will be back at some point after the next match, probably more likely to be a Monday release or a Tuesday release with that Sunday twilight fixture. But we'll see how we go. And have a good week, everyone. Go North.